Hi everyone, you're watching M4G Advocacy Media. We're doing the Journey Series video podcast right now. And I'm Mark, a brown man who's bald with a black and white beard. Today I've got on a yellow and blue striped shirt.
And I'm Crystal. Today I'm wearing a blue blouse with flowers, and I have shoulder length curly brown hair and brown eyes. And today I'm wearing my brown glasses.
And on today's episode, we've got Donna Bungard, who is the Marketing Accessibility Program Manager at Indeed. Hi, Donna.
Hi.
Hi, how are you all?
Doing
Good.
well.
Hey everyone, my name is Donna. I'm a 40-something woman with dark hair, light brown glasses, bright red lipstick, and a black shirt today. And I am in front of a screen behind me that says we help people get jobs because that's what we do over at Indeed.
So
Thank you
tell
so
us,
much.
thank you for coming. So do you want to start by telling us a bit about your journey, what led you up to the work you're doing now, and as much as you're willing to share?
Absolutely. Thank you. Well, I grew up as a member of the disability community. In my household, I was considered the only one who wasn't disabled. That said, later on, I was identified as having a learning disability, which actually was apparent much younger, but it was the 80s. So anyway, it took us a while. It took us until the ADA was passed to make the whole learning disabled
Right.
bit, official. But with that, though, I always joke I'm mysteriously neurodivergent because being a cis female, they had no idea what was up. They just knew something was a little weird about this one. We'll just say she's learning disabled and move on with life. But in my household, we had a little of everything, a variety of different barriers. And growing up, I had always seen the barriers and seen how that impacted our lives, which of course, when you're a kid, it's all normal, right? Because everything you experience is your whole world. So it's normal, right? So I then went off into the digital space. Um, who knew me having to do stuff that was like a bunch of squirrels working in tandem in my head actually works for me. So I was really, really gravitating towards that technology space where I would constantly be inundated with emails and messages and phone calls and Slack messages and all these wonderful things. Um, and then must be 9 years ago now, I was working at an agency and I was friends, or still am actually, she's fantastic, with the head of accessibility there. And she was saying how it's the right thing to do. And I said, bull, it's practical. If you want people to access your content, you need to give them your content, or else why are you bothering to put it out there in the first place? This isn't a good thing. This is just how it has to work. Because in my mind, that's always how it worked. If I wanted my father, who's blind in one eye, to give me money to get ice cream, walking up on the right side of him, where I wouldn't make him jump, would get me ice cream money. Walking on the left side and making him jump would, me being a little brat and him being more likely to say no. If I didn't want my sister, who's hard of hearing, to get out of carrying groceries, well, I made sure she could hear me. I was very accessible. Um, I was very inclusive whenever it was like chores. I can tell you I was very, very good little sister that way. Share all the chores. So when I was talking to this person in my professional life, that kind of inner brat came out. I'm like, well, this is the same thing as carrying groceries, except that we want somebody to go through I forget, it might have been an e-commerce experience. It might have been some other web experience, but we wanted them to get to a certain point in that journey online. And if it's broken, they can't. So it
Right.
means we failed. Eh. So at that point, she turned to me and she said, you realize most people, especially people in businesses, don't see it this way. And I went, well, that's silly. And I'm like, it's blowing my mind that this whole existence that I thought was normal was apparently this, wow, that's insightful.
Mm.
So over the years, I grew my technical skills for testing and more the practical, tactical pieces of accessibility. And then I kind of followed my curiosity because as much as the technical's cool, I really am much more interested in how the systems work. I don't want to fix one website. I want to change systems that educate people so all of the websites can work. I loved speaking at Zero Project because the very idea of it being at the United Nations, we weren't fixing one segment. We were talking globally across all the systems. And that's where my passion is the strategic systemic changes, because I think if there are systemic barriers for any underrepresented group, that system is what we need to change. And that's where my passion lies. I love the idea of promoting accessibility as a strategic arm, sorry, a tactical arm of a larger disability inclusion strategy. And I really want to amplify the way that inclusion and disability inclusion is a really multifaceted thing that touches technical and product pieces. It touches the real world lived environments. It touches everybody's lived daily experience at work or in a home. And it's a societal piece that has a very internalized bit. And how all of that plays together at this larger role that if we start talking about it, helps communities, it helps businesses, it creates communities within businesses and things like that. That was a whole lot of words.
No, kind of segues perfect into our last conversation. So, you were doing exactly what the world needs right now. Because nobody was educated, nobody was given the framework to know how to deal with people with disabilities or minorities or people that were, not seen as anybody before, so you're giving them opportunities to be seen. And that's, when we started in 4G, we had a plan of how to do things. It wasn't, of course, as big as what Indeed can do. But at the same time, we thought, okay, the lived experiences we've had and the tokenism that we've dealt with, and then being able to interview people and get their story and know their ambition and hopes, and alongside with the experiences that they can discuss with us and our listeners and viewers, is hopefully going to help people advance and understand the world, give them a framework for, oh, these things are awesome and these people can do, not us, but our guests.
And you, but
Well,
okay.
yeah, but what they can do and what they're capable of, because we didn't know this stuff, we weren't taught that they were valued and can do this and that, so we don't know how to, it's uncomfortable for us to include them because we don't have the framework to know how to be inclusive, so in essence, that's where we were going, but also what you are doing. So it's so awesome.
That I wanted to say that too, is like, why not us? But I mean,
Yeah.
I think what
Yeah.
Crystal was trying to get to was that there are certain people who have strengths which are geared more towards um like actually physically going to like say Washington DC and enacting, helping and pushing for those changes in the system that are required, and that's not necessarily our strength, right? But or what we want to do, but we can certainly enact change in our own small way.
Well, in truth, I don't, when I talk about systemic change, I don't actually think we always have to look for governments. I think there's a social and cultural change. I actually think the cultural change needs to drive all other changes. When you have technology changes that don't have the cultural understanding behind it, then you end up with, well, frankly, covers like The Economist covers a week or two ago there, where they depicted a walker with the presidential seal saying no way to run a country. Highly, highly offensive. However, if you look at it, there's color contrast, there's appropriate letter typing. In terms of print media, it was completely accessible. It was incredibly offensive and completely accessible. So we need to have these cultural changes first, and that needs to drive regulation. That needs to drive technology. That needs to drive our AI language models. It's what needs to drive all those pieces. It has to come. So conversations like you all are having are incredibly important because we're, I'll say decades, I believe hundreds of years, people
Yeah.
with disabilities were hidden. They were hidden away. So, and everybody always thought it was their own issues, their own families, their own bodies, their own brains, their own everything internalized. And it's just them and isolated and siloed off and hidden. And by bringing these stories to light, very rarely am I talking to a group of people where at the end of it, somebody or multiple somebodies aren't standing up and saying, that's my life. And they're recognizing it in all the people around them. And, or people come up to me quietly after, I'm not ready to disclose, but that's my life. Or that's the life of my partner, my child, my father, my brother, what have you. So understanding this and normalizing these conversations are a critical first step for that cultural change to happen. And that's why it's important the work you're doing. It's important the work that people like Killicat Wells is doing across both entertainment and education and employment. It's why the work we're doing at Indeed to get people to talk about it like in terms of inclusion. We have a disability inclusion handbook for employers to help educate them and see these things because we've hidden people who are perceived as different for too long. And we've put the responsibility for inclusion on the people we're excluding for too long.
And not only that, but I really appreciate and this psychology of how we got where we are and understanding that people didn't have that framework to know how to deal with us and to unknowingly, not purposely, because they weren't taught how to do these things or how to have these conversations. And they were even told by the doctors, our parents, how to talk to us, what we were capable of and not. And that was wrong information a lot of times. And so we can't be upset with people for not knowing how to do things. We have to be able to have these conversations and be able to give people peace of mind of, okay, yes, I'm disabled. Yes, I have these, deficits. Yes, but I'm really strong in these areas though. But you're you weren't given the framework to understand or be comfortable with my discrepancies of my disability, that you hit away the good parts of what I can do. And so in essence, it's also giving people, saying it's okay that you're making mistakes, but now you know better. So are you gonna do better? Or are you going to push back and try to cut because you're afraid of losing your job or losing what you have, your comforts and stuff like that? What kind of person are you gonna be going forward?
And if I can interject here, I think it's historically we've been presented with binary options, like you either do things our way or you do things the wrong way or you don't do them at all, right? And I tried to relate everything to Star Trek, and we watched a really good episode of the show Picard last night, and there's this character on who's has been on Star Trek for like 30 years, named Data, and he's very unemotional, technically minded individual, but he strives to belong and be part of humanity. And he has this, and he's inherently good, but he's not quite part of the same part of the rest of society. He feels, well, yeah, right. He doesn't really feel as a robot, but he's striving to be more than that. And then he has this deeply narcissistic, domineering older brother, which we'll call
Lore?
his name is Lore, but we could use him as a placeholder for sort of the people who are in power in society, right? And he constantly tries to overrule Data and tell him that you'd be better if you were more like me, and all the stuff we hear as people with disabilities. And where Data finally bridges the gap after 30 years is he lets Lore take him over and think he has the advantage when he basically ends up overtaking him and getting rid of that by integrating him into his being and becoming one with him. And I think practically the way that looks for us as people with disabilities is saying, okay, I don't like these internally ableistic things and all this other stuff, but integrating it in and being compassionate and forgiving, and to a certain extent, and integrating that, and for people that have the ability who are in power to integrate our experience into their own, and together we become one and just move forward from there. But perhaps that's a bit simplistic.
Well,
But I see where you're going with that because if when we make space for people to get it wrong, they're suddenly not afraid to talk about all the things they don't understand or why they don't understand it or something I do. It drives my husband nuts. The internet called it dolphining. I don't know if that's really the right term. Of we'll be having a conversation and we'll stop talking, but in my head, I'm going a mile a minute. So I'm still going for a good few minutes when it's silent, and I'll pick up as if we were still having the conversation. And he will have no idea what I'm talking about because 10 minutes will have passed. I will be about 10 minutes further or maybe even further along in the conversation in my head. And I'll be popping back up. Oh, well, and then there's the blue vase, you know. Sure. But if we hadn't been able to have these conversations about, okay, my brain is still going a mile a minute. And just because I'm not talking to you doesn't mean I'm not actually continuing to problem solve this situation. It's a very minute, very, one-to-one kind of conversation example. But it's the same thing of, you know, almost 30 years ago, like the first few times I did it, he'd be like, "Excuse me." And now he'll just be like, "Not in your head, please rewind a little bit." And it's 30 years of marriage. So what can I say? But my point is, not quite. He'd correct me if he watches this. But nonetheless, my point is when we allow people to ask the questions and even express that I don't understand why you're doing this. And they can say, okay, well, it's not only me, there's two of us in this conversation. I once had a 12-year-old boy who identifies as autistic turn to me and say, why do I always have to translate to everybody else? Why can't anyone translate to me?
Yeah.
And I'm like, oh my God, you're right. It's not fair. I don't have an answer for that. So I guess my point is, by educating people, we share the responsibility of communication, we share the responsibility of things, and by sharing it, we can become more integrated. So I get your data analogy. And
Yeah,
again, I
there
tend to take a lot.
it's frustrating though, because there are obviously a large segment of people in the population who are maybe in more power roles or control positions who are unwilling to share and unwilling to let go of the past and want to hold on to old paradigms, when we all know that we've held on to these ideas for hundreds of years and they never worked for anyone, and that's why we're where we are now.
yeah, for sure.
And if we go back to that old way of being, it's just gonna not work for anyone going forward.
No, there's no sense of going backwards. We as a society have come too far. We've had too many people speaking out, whether it be in various realms. COVID changed the game. People got vocal, people stayed vocal, and we're not going backwards. How that's going to look going forward is going to depend on engagement. It's going to depend on individuals standing up. It's going to depend on allyship. It's going to depend on getting people with disabilities into essential roles. Like I mentioned AI earlier. In the world of technology, you can't blink without someone talking about AI. And so I've done my homework. We need more people doing the programming, doing the language learning to get rid of the bias. We can't expect everybody else to do it. So hire people with disabilities who are going to give their own lived experiences and the community experience. And also never expect anybody with a disability to be the expert on anything other than themselves and their presentation of disability, unless they're going out and doing the work to learn about all the other things, at which point there's a difference. So it's just a matter of allowing people to grow into the roles they want, but also utilizing their lived experiences as a part of it. And I really believe that the more people get talking, the more people get authentically saying, hi, I'm mysteriously neurodivergent, I'll eventually get a label that, is more effective. But this is how I present. Don't ask me for linear thought. You mentioned earlier something about strengths and deficits. Well, no one wants me to, manage the finances of a huge company. Like, the idea of that makes me queasy and sick. And I don't think that has anything to do with my, neurodivergence. I think that has everything to do with that's not my skill set.
Right.
So I think that everybody needs to stop us making assumptions that what we've learned in the past is true. I think
No.
we need to start questioning it. And and Indeed, we talk a lot about job descriptions. People rethink what do you need on the job descriptions? Do you need 8 years experience, or do you need these 10 skills? Do you need a college degree? There's a huge disability education gap. Do you need a college degree, or do you need someone who's learned X, Y, Z, L, and M? By switching that skills approach, we're able to kind of tear away and ask people to rethink what's always been done. And beyond the job description, beyond that, look at employment. Look at, again, get more people out of that disability employment gap. Change the system there, and then allow things to grow and ripple out. And I feel like there's just such incredible power there, all starting with conversations.
Right. And, I'm encouraged by people today and being able to have these conversations, particularly the younger generations are, from our age, younger, are more inclusive in really thinking about how things were done in the past. And there were definite things that worked. And then there were things that like you said, you have to question it, like, why in the world, and why are we pushing these people aside, so it's so interesting how there's a lot more empathy at play, and it's very evident by people like yourself that we talk to that are on that same page with us and wanting to make the world better in the future. And even right now, we are very aware that everything is not going to happen, right away, but certainly the more these conversations can be had and broadcast, and even in private, sometimes it's necessary, that's more necessary sometimes. The more they're had, the more we can, okay, these are the issues, and okay, now we know the issue, so we can fix it and move forward,
And
One of the, sorry, go ahead. Oh,
No,
well,
please.
one of the other, I was thinking, so you're asking employers to rethink their achievement-based approach and switch for a skill-based approach to looking for candidates. What about an even more basic question like do people need to come into work?
Yeah,
Why?
why?
Yeah, a lot of companies are taking different approaches to that question now. And I don't have a universal answer because I don't think there is a universal answer.
Right.
But I am comforted by the idea that there are organizations that are staying remote or hybrid depending on the role. And I don't think that's going anywhere. I think that if anything, companies are going to have to just continue to evolve. I mean, they've continued to evolve from, I mentioned something about growing up in the 80s, growing to the point where, I was on my Commodore 64 as a little kid. And companies went from, typewriters to electronic typewriters to their very large, all the same weird sand color machines over and over that are computers, dot matrix printers, to what we have now of me having a, 5 pound laptop over there that so I have two, one I'm speaking to and one over there, but a 5 pound laptop where I do the majority of my work. Now AI. Companies have had to, in my lifetime, companies have had to evolve a huge amount. So I don't see why they're not going to continue to evolve now. I have absolute faith. Um, I think COVID threw a lot of individuals and a lot of organizations for a loop, and they're just still getting their footing. I know it's been a few years, but massive change has happened in just a very short period of time. I think we could all say we're kind of tired of living through historical events. Um, so yeah.
Yeah, it's always an interesting conversation when, you know, companies try to backtrack what people, not just disabilities, needed to do to keep working during that time. And then trying to say we don't have to do that anymore. When we know it was perfectly capable of them making it happen, you know. Um,
And,
the justifications are, yeah.
I think,
and
oh, go ahead.
Tad onto that, it's not only employers, but it's also like companies like selling to customers. Say during COVID, let's say your phone went down, you had the option to do exchanges or get certain items without physically having to go into the store, or do certain banking without physically having to go to the
Right.
bank. And now they seem to have backtracked where it's like
Right.
now you have to physically come in because COVID's over. Yay!
Well, I think part of the challenge is that different people work and function differently. So some people do benefit from an office setting for work. Some people do benefit from the tactile experience when purchasing something or asking a question to a person in front of them instead of over a chat bot. And in order to be respectful of those experiences, I have to be respectful of the idea that because I love being remote. I love visiting with my teammates every so often, but I love being remote. That said, I know that doesn't work for everybody, and I have to be respectful of that. So I don't think there's a one answer, but I think there is a world of flexibility ahead, and that change has to come sooner than later. In that flexibility of how we look at our job descriptions, flexibility of how we look at our work lives, flexibility of what we think of as skills. Is AI part of your skills? is all of this. I keep bringing that up, but I'm sorry, in my world, I can't ignore it. It's everywhere. And I feel like it's coming to everybody else's world as well.
Yeah, that's what I like. Chris is right. We need, and you're right, we need options, flexibility. I didn't mean to imply that we need to all go remote. I mean, but it should be an option. People should be given a choice. Let's say you're a customer and you want to exchange something or return something. Well, here are your options. You can come in and do that, or we can arrange it other ways. But when people are unwilling to do that and say, no, this is the way it has to be done,
Yeah,
it's
A lot of reason for frustration, that is for sure.
right, right. And as far as, you, so the other thing we're talking with with the person before, and you were bringing up the whole AI thing, we were discussing with her about, building our website. And not, so it's kind of ironic, right? So these companies, some of these website develop companies, they want to have integratable tools to add to the website. But the tools to build a website are not accessible. So it's hard for us to make everything accessible for our people that come on our website.
right.
So we go back and forth between, I'll do some things and he'll do something. Right now he's doing a lot of it. So I think the last thing I did was the promo library. But anyway, yeah, it just makes it all so much more difficult when okay, have you been to our website?
Yes.
Okay, so we have a plan of what we want to do when we can do it, more than just the podcast. But ultimately, the first part of it is having guests and being able to talk with them and have these conversations and give people a framework on what people can do, right? And spaces they were never given the time of day, and people like what you do, like Indeed, they need to be able to say, oh, these people have these qualifications, but maybe they're not educated the way the companies are expecting them to be, so we don't have the people we really want on our team because we've cut them out, so that's what we've been doing, is not only having these conversations, but also building up promos and stuff like that and then listing the topics we have within the conversation, having chapters and everything you want to know about what we talk about on every episode is in there. So that if somebody, say, that's not disabled, doesn't understand the situation or has not heard that conversation, without an argument, can look up, okay, they talked about this in this chapter, let me go here and look, and I know we're not the only ones doing this, but it's certainly something that we see the problem of, because we came from tokenism and all the, ism stuff. It's definitely something that not only we want to be able to offer but also with lived experiences of being able to have those conversations and explain it to people on a where it's understood, not pointy fingers, it's really important to us.
Yeah.
you know.
And it's a lot harder when the tools, like Chris was saying, to make this information more accessible to people are in themselves inaccessible. We have our own challenges and it's just an extra hurdle to get by.
Right.
It's-
And that itself is what I was saying is the ironic part, because if we can't make this very, very important conversations accessible to the very people we're trying to help, and that's not just the disability community, that's everybody, right?
Oh,
If we
absolutely.
can
Everybody.
make it accessible for whatever they need to be able to get the information, how are we, in essence, helping? So
It is a multifaceted thing. I I always tease that I'm screaming from the rooftops that accessibility is the tactical arm of disability inclusion. And that's because I see inclusion, disability inclusion, touching everything. We need to touch the products, whether it be something, an e-commerce site, or whether it be building a website. We need to touch the products. We need to educate the teams who are building those, because we don't want a technically accessible thing that's unusable. You can have something that is fully compliant, that is absolutely an awful experience. So we need to educate people on the cultural aspects of it in order to drive correct inclusion there. We need to look at our physical spaces when we're looking at our different body types all going to be able to engage and take, joy or information or whatever they're supposed to take away from a given experience? Are we looking at these live spaces as in, you know, I work with our events team a lot. Fantastic group, incredibly well thought through. And one of the conversations we had was, or, and it's not just me, it's genuinely a conversation, is we don't put all of the spaces for accessible seating together, because it's not like everybody is going to be best friends just because they all share disabilities. we we make a point with our vendors to move them around a bit and spread that out, because they're everybody's doesn't have to get along just because you share one social identity. So our live spaces, are we not only being accessible, but are we also being thoughtful and mindful about what are the lived experiences of people who are going to use these, and the people who are part of that larger disability community who is going to engage with the person using them, and are they able to be near each other and sitting together and hanging out and all of these things. So it's that physical element, it's the strategic piece of 27% of the US and the EU all identify as with a disability. What does that mean systemically? Where's that cultural piece? What's the strategy? How are we including people? How are we making it easier for them to spend their money? How are we making it easy for us to spend our money? How are we doing all of these things from that larger 10,000 foot view? How am I helping my sister do the chores with me? It's all the same brain process of being it touches everything. So that piece of that is, yes, we can't have you teach the cultural piece without the technical piece, but it needs some cultural pieces, and it's this kind of a mess. But I think we're really, really making strides in the right direction. That said, it doesn't help right now. Right now, you're probably frustrated with your darn website.
Just a tiny bit.
But
But I mean, over 2.5 years now, we've definitely gotten a lot, more done, but there's a lot more we still want to.
I think the bulk of our frustration, especially early on, was that, there were a lot of tools that we used that claimed to be accessible, and we spent time, energy, and money on those, and it turned out that they weren't at all what we were led to believe.
Right.
And yeah, there was a lot of that.
Yeah, and then the other, you were, forgot to get into the AI thing. Is, we had so many tools that we were trying to work with. And we tried out different accessibility tools to help us. And so we get a lot of pushback and, white finger wagging of using AI, we use Accessibility, right? That ultimately helps us make it more accessible, right? But a lot of people fuss about that it's messing up. You can explain this better.
Yeah,
Go for it.
the argument is that there's this tool that rides on top of a website and uh, tries to make things accessible for people. And from what we've seen, it works really well. But a lot of the people who are maybe have web development as a career, or who are deeply invested in coding things, but maybe they have a company or whatever, they are very reluctant to adopt or advocate for something like that, because it takes away what they're doing.
I actually have to respectfully disagree. Those are overlays, and the primary argument I've seen against them is that it interferes with certain assistive technologies. The assistive technology will get stuck in the overlay and not getting into the content of the website. That's what I've read. I have not there's no lived experience here, but that is what I've read. So I wouldn't look at it as a developer trying to do that. I've also read lawsuits of, I don't know which service they were using, but people being sued and being held accountable for their site still not being accessible, saying that the overlay wasn't enough to protect them from those legal proceedings in the US. So from what I've read, it sounds to me like a developer is more likely trying to speak to those concerns that they've read about and or protect you legally, or at least not be personally accountable for suggesting something that other companies have been held legally accountable to. Now, I do not know the outcomes of those legal court cases. I do not represent one group or another. But as someone who used to work in development, I know that a lot of developers I spoke to would love if that would have worked, because sometimes the nuance that needs to happen to make something work in an accessible way across platforms and across different mediums and on a mobile app versus that it can add up in terms of hours. So most developers I know would have loved one of those to work. So if they're recommending against it, there's probably something along those lines of looking at it as protecting you. That said, it's going to come down to weighing the pluses and minuses and what's going to work for you and your organization.
Right. And that's an interesting point that you brought up, with something we might have to look at. But I mean, as creators with a disability ourselves, there are many of us, the time, energy, and financial resources it takes to maybe do things a different way, are are just prohibitive,
There,
especially considering that there's so many other draws on our time, energy, and finances. We have to pick our battles. No.
uh, I fully respect that. Certain solutions are very cost prohibitive for sure. And yes, time is something that people don't seem to understand, that there is a tax associated with disability, and it is a time tax, and it is a financial tax, and it compounds.
Right.
So I respect what choices we each have to make when we got to make them, because that's kind of, I read a meme once that said adulting is the ultimate improvisation. Like,
Mm.
so I fully support where you're coming from, because I am aware there is a huge tax. There is an education tax, there is a financial tax, there is a time tax. The same 4 hours are not going to be the same. You get 10 people in a room with 10 different lived experiences, and how much can get done in 4 hours and how long 4 hours really is dramatically different.
Yeah.
And very also reliant on the support system, and the location, and is the environment set up for you to be successful.
Yeah.
Because you try to get a typical environment, and I'm using air quotes for those who can't see me, a typical environment, not everyone's going to function the same. You're going to have some people who will have physical limitations, some people who are very aware that that fluorescent light, the third one to the left, has that annoying flicker and can't stop paying attention to it. You're going to have other people just social anxieties, or afraid that somebody's looking at them, not afraid, but aware or conscious that somebody might be looking at them and watching them work. And there's all of these things that add up, and it's a huge tax, and limit the ability that, if you're a creator trying to get good work out there, we need to get it out there. And if you have the resources to do things a certain way, then you're going to do your best. It's the same as everything else of what you were saying earlier. You do your best you can now. And if you have the ability or knowledge to do something better later, then you do that. And we all just have to keep doing this whole improv thing that is being an adult who is trying to do some good in this world, and hope for the best.
Yeah, exactly. It's a very fine line of you want to get that content out there. But you also want it to be accessible because of your lived experiences of things not being accessible. You want to have that there, but it might not be what most people find acceptable as far as like web accessibility goes. But you're also very hindered when it comes to what you can provide financially for those people who need it.
Yeah.
So when people are coming at you, when it's right now, it's only the two of us. When people are coming at you for not doing everything that you're doing perfectly or to their standards, that's hard, and you have to be able to kind of brush it off and say we're doing exactly what we're supposed to be doing right now. And I'm sorry it doesn't fit your standards right now, but give me a better option. Give me accessibility to be able to use the tools that you want me to use on my website. Make it more affordable for me to do that. if you can, please, it's so hard, don't, it's like,
Yeah,
what
we're-
do we do?
we're open to hearing everyone's points about certain things and but it's when like Chris was saying, when it, especially online, when people start attacking us for certain choices we make without fully understanding the implications or the impact those choices have for us, it hurts.
Yeah,
I can appreciate that. When the public calls into question our integrity, essentially, it does definitely hurt. And I tend to try to find a way to clarify with people, but you're not always ever going to be able to reach everybody. And that's just, it's one of those things when we put ourselves out there to have that conversation. Like one of the questions not questions, but one of the things I always grappled with because of my own experiences is what is disabled enough? Now, I actually, for everybody else, it's how, however, whatever barriers you face, barriers you face, I respect that. But for myself, I always grew up in a household full of people with more profound disabilities or presentation of disabilities. And I was always considered the one without the disability, even though I was learning disabled, because it never seemed I was disabled enough to count. So I had a lot of those same kind of conversations like you're having online, but kind of internal to my head of, am I doing enough? Am I talking about this correctly? Am I doing this? Am I doing that? And at some point I had to, I'm far over 40 at this point, but I swear around 40 is when this hit of the, oh, well, we're just going to do things and I know I can apologize and learn from it later. I'm just going to get going. I'm going to stop waiting for it to be enough, waiting for this to go. So,
yeah,
um,
interesting. So, like, what you're doing with Indeed, right? It's interesting how people can hear conversations like we're having and hear the problematic things that we're discussing, right? And saying, oh, I didn't even realize that was an issue. I didn't think about those things. How do we make it easier for not us per se, but for future people who want to do stuff, and even for people now, to be able to help equality be a thing, you know? Um, and so it's important, like, to have, uh, you know, finally have those companies that are saying, hey, these are the problems, and we want to hire people to make sure those things are in place.
to respond to your point about companies having these conversations, yes, I feel really privileged. Our senior leadership, straight down or across the ranks, however you like to look at organizational structures, straight across the ranks is really engaged with this topic and really committed to educating people not only about that technical aspect, but about the pieces that this impacts people more than it impacts more than just the ability to edit a website. It
Right.
impacts your
Oh,
voice,
definitely.
financials. It impacts every other aspect. And by helping train people, we're making change with the technology, but we're also making change with how we talk to it, how we educate employers, how we maybe have an employer who's fully aware and on board, but they're just not sure how to implement it. How can we support them on their journey?
Right.
And I'm really a big fan of thinking of things incrementally, like, okay, you can't take everything on today. what can you get done? You know, if it's a person, it's what 2 things, 3 things can you tell me by Friday you will be all set with? If it's an organization in 3 months, what 2 or 3 things can we commit to?
Mm.
Little by little by little, I think is the way we have to approach this because this is a very, very big pie to eat.
So we talked about the processes and the questions and stuff like that when it comes to Indeed. What are, what can people expect when they go to Indeed for people that don't know what Indeed is?
Wonderful. Indeed is a job matching platform where we help connect people with jobs. When you go to Indeed, you can fill out your profile, input all your skills, take a look around, and you can search for jobs. You can make it so employers can reach out to you. And there's a whole slew of abilities you can do online to get connected to that work, depending on what types of role you're applying for and what tools that employer uses to connect with you. But you could have the whole conversation right on Indeed and hopefully get a job very quickly. Our goal is to shorten that time to get job seekers who are facing barriers in jobs and really help make a more sustainable promote work well-being and really have a healthy labor force.
So can you talk to us about the collaboration you've done with Bill & Strong?
I'd love to. For those of you who aren't familiar with it, Billion Strong is a grassroots organization founded by some remarkable leaders in our field. Deborah and, oh my gosh, how do we say
Neat.
Neat. I'm sorry, Paneet. I've only seen your name. I've never actually spoken it before. They found Billion Strong to get the voices of people with disability out there and to help with self-identification as well, because it's really hard for organizations or anyone, but it's hard to make the argument that they need to do this for inclusion if they don't know how many of us there are. So for example, I said 27% of the US. Well, in the US, typical disclosure at work is 4 to 7%. It's a very big gap and there's real reasons for it, but Billion Strong is promoting pride and understanding and education of the issues surrounding disability for the disability community. So for those of you who aren't aware, it's a global movement. Well, in the UK, they have something called the Disability Confidence Scheme. And that is for employers. There's 3 different levels, varying levels of proving commitment to hiring people with disabilities and including them in the labor force. So with Billion Strong, we put together some resources of here's information to help you present your best self to employers. And then here's a job board that is just disability confident employers or identify jobs associated that the employers associated themselves disability confident. They want to encourage people with disabilities to apply. And together we're trying to just funnel people directly to those roles in the UK with the resources to support them. And I'm really excited to see how that's going to come forward. I think all 3 of us are a Billion Strong advisors as well, which means that we're here to support the community and try to facilitate change with connections to that group. And I was really grateful when that side of my life came together with Indeed's side of my world, and we could really make that connection, build out those resources, build out that job board. And
So will there be, you said this is primarily a UK happening, or will there be a division for the US?
Well, disability competent is a government classification for employers. So disability competent as it is right now can only live in the UK. However, we're working with other groups on things like, if you're familiar with Making Space, that is an organization that helps people with disabilities gain skills in specific areas to help them get employed. So we're working with Making Space. We're going to have some courses to help people get rules that way. And I have a feeling that certain pieces will be US based. I can't say exactly because nothing has, it's a new
Right.
announced.
This is new territory for all of us. So, yeah, we're, what you're doing is awesome, helping people find what they're good at and find those new niches that they want to dive into, stuff like that. And that is so important in advancing society. Oh, okay, we know these things now, and we need to integrate those people and those lived experiences into our company and making it part of, embedding it into our corporations and companies and all those things. So we really appreciate talking to people like you that are doing that.
No, it's vital. Any of us, if somebody doesn't already identify with a disability, if you live long enough, you will. So frankly, it's future proofing for people who aren't currently disabled. And for those who identify with one, whether it be, physical, emotional, cognitive, audio, I said visual, mobility, whatever combination of presentations an individual has, they deserve an opportunity to
Right.
get out there. And indeed, we talk a lot about talent is universal, but opportunity is not. And it really comes down to that. You need the chance to be able to do it. And we're all going to benefit.
Yeah, for sure. We, a lady we talked to before as well, we were talking about the different things that we would like to be able to implement when we're in a better place, as far as like all the things that is so hard for the disability community to access and give, like housing and healthcare and all those things are basic needs, and to get to the meat and potatoes of what you're doing, right? We have to be secure in those areas first, equality, right? To be able to be our best selves, right?
Yeah.
And so many people deal with that, so when you're doing what you're doing, and helping people understand these are the issues, and we need to really figure out ways to let people come to the forefront of equality to make sure that they can do their best. That's important.
I think so. And I think we need to also start understanding that what someone's best is going to look different. And I'm not saying different person by person, sometimes day by day.
Right.
Disability is dynamic.
Right.
It's not a one and done. You mentioned earlier something about things being very binary.
Mhm.
How somebody's feeling on any given day disability or not, changes how they interact with the world. And when you have a disability that could be dynamic, that, I'm sorry?
No, I was agreeing with you.
Oh yeah, it's just, we need to understand that doing our best does not mean going at 110 miles an hour every day.
Right.
Some
Right.
days we need to be quiet and listen more.
Yeah.
Some days, which I know I've spoken a lot, but that was actually something earlier in my day. I was like, I just needed to be quiet and listen for a while. That's where my energy was. I was like, all right, I gotta fill my cup here. And I did. But
There are definite days when I'm more talkative, and there are days when I love to just listen and take it in and think about, overthink if you want to get to, think about how to make it better for people, how can I, and people with this disability or lived experiences of hardships, have that, they can do that best. They can, figure out things from a different perspective. And that can be so awesome. So the fact that you guys are pairing with Building a Strong in the disability community is huge.
there's a lot out there. There's a lot of talent out there. There's a lot of skills out there. There's a lot of people who want to learn those skills. There's just so much out there. And I feel like everything is starting to line up. It's time.
Yeah,
So I'm excited to see where this is going to bring all of us.
yeah. So my,
Yeah.
yeah, we have conversations about that a lot. It's slow, going, and we know it's gonna have to be that way, but at the same time, the possibilities. If and if people are get on board with it, and it seems like it's slowly happening.
Right. And you see a lot of these conversations in different communities. I think the more that we unite and see the intersectionalities that bring us together, the more likely that we'll see change sooner rather than later. It's kind of like a snowball. It's rolling down a hill and slowly picking up steam, and more pieces of snow have to attach to it to really get it going. And eventually there are people that are unfortunately gonna have to jump out of the way or get run over, you know?
Definitely gaining momentum. I totally agree.
Um, so is there anything you'd like to promote, or how can people reach you? I didn't.
Well, you're welcome to reach me on LinkedIn. I'm absolutely open to having a conversation. And in terms of what promote, I think the work we're doing is great. If you're an employer, I think the handbook that we have has a lot of information. But really, the best message is rethink what you've always done and what you assume is normal. And rethink what normal is, because I think the idea of normal is outdated. And I think if we look at what we've always done and really think about it, we're going to find everyone has something that we can learn and grow from. And I don't know, I want us to come away with hope, because I feel like things are happening.
I think it's more than the idea of something being normal is outdated. That idea never was in date. It's just that we've been misled.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, good one. So anything else?
No, I don't think so.
Well, thank you. Thank you.
So thank you so much. That was such a wonderful conversation.
Hey,
Using this media. This is really important conversations you're having, and the fact that you're having them with so many different organizations and so many different people and all of this, it shows that movement.
Yeah.
thanks, Donna, for joining us today and talking to us about the work you're doing at Indeed.
Well, thank you both for having me and for all the conversations you're having. These are important bits that are going to help grow that culture of inclusion. So thank you so much for your work.
Okay,
Thank
thank you.
you. Have
Bye.
a good night.
Have a
Bye.
good day. Hi, everyone. Thanks for joining us. Hopefully, you enjoyed this episode. Remember to encourage, educate, and empower someone today. Bye.